turned out it was the most accomplished person in the field. That's always cool. Yes, that happened at Berkeley. Then the other thing that we do is we tend to put so we said perception, symbol representations, and then our memories are entirely confabulated based on already deficient symbol and perceptual representation.
Yes.
And so I never like the statement that we don't know how the brain works.
Yeah.
I think we do know how the brain works, but that it works through very limited filters.
Yes.
Okay, so knowing that and accepting it, and it seems to me that this idea of looking to nature, looking outside us, is so critical. And in fact, I hope you won't mind me sharing this, but a few years back, I had sent you something by text.
Happy Wednesday, back at
And
work, so
I
I
was
gotta get
kind of in
started,
disbelief
'cause I never
about
know
something
when my
I'd
boss
seen
is
in
gonna
the
message me
media.
to let me know
It's
what's
like they got it all
starting.
wrong,
This is how it
and I knew
works.
the
Just
person
wait and see
involved,
how
and
many patients come in.
it was
when
not
I
a
get
good
to it.
situation for them. And I was like, they got it all wrong. And you wrote back, and you said, it's all lies. Back to nature, the only truth.
Wow.
And
That's wild.
and I wrote that down. I put it over my desk.
Wow.
And I still, I'd tattooed it on my forehead if I didn't already have it well committed to memory. But I know that's true, right? Nature we can look at, and it's.
But when I say it's all lies, you just talked about our ability to, how limited our facility to see and understand what we see. Yes?
Yes.
So based on that leads us to, we can't know much. You know what I'm saying? Our resolution is so low on everything that we're really just like, we're grasping at straws. We have no idea. We have no idea. And there's great power in knowing that. Because if you think you know what's going on, chances are you're being deceived. Not because somebody's deceiving you, but because they're telling you what they see and they don't know. It's all, do you know what I'm saying? It's all made up. Everything
There's the message.
Everything we know is made up. Maybe it's true.
Yeah,
This brings
should
us
be on
to pro
time.
wrestling. It's the reason that pro wrestling is closer to reality than anything else we can watch or any other content. We know it's made up. We know that it's a performance. It's storytelling. And that's how everything is, except we think wrestling's fake and the world is real. Wrestling's real and the world's fake.
You talk about in the book, we're definitely going in this direction. In the book, you talk about this notion of entertaining the idea of the opposite being true.
Yeah.
And there are not only emerging but established fields of psychology that are making great ground, I think, into the human psyche. Byron Katie's work and others, where you take a statement and you start playing with that statement you poke at its authenticity.
Yeah.
And when I first heard that, I thought, this is kind of hokey, right? It's just words. And then I realized how foolish I was being, because she's really onto something. And there are others too, of course, but in science, that's exactly what you do. You don't really ask questions in science. You are forced to raise hypotheses and try and say true or false. Now, there are limitations to that approach, certainly. I mean, pure observational studies have been incredible in terms of what they've revealed to us, especially in medicine. A patient that has a bullet hole through a certain area of the brain, you don't go in and say, oh, I hypothesize that person will have a deficit in seeing faces. No, the person wandered into the clinic and they go, this person sees faces but can't make sense of them. And then you forensically arrive at an understanding. So, but in general, we go about things in this way, and considering that the opposite might be true, well, that's a little bit, I suppose, of like seeing the whale at the surface of the water. It's like, well, the opposite of my experience, which is all above water for the most part, is maybe not the complete experience of life. You start seeing the inverse all the time. So I want to
consider the inverse all the time. And it really relates to the way that you described how we see colors is based on contrast. So maybe blue's only blue in relation to yellow. So if blue is our choice, if we're not considering yellow, blue doesn't exist. Do you know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
It's like we talk about night. It's only night because there's day. If there was no day, there is no night. In all of our cases, like it's like the yin yang. You know, it's like it's we. There's the light and the shadow. Always, there's always another side for everything, and we focus on one aspect. But if we look at the other aspect, chances are we'll learn something too.
The nervous system is not just able to do this, it's the way it does everything. Two experiments I'll just briefly describe. My scientific great-grandparents, David Hubel and Torrance de Weasel, showed that if you force a person to look at something for a long period of time without moving their eyes, there's a way that you can do this, the image disappears. Because normally your eyes are making little microsaccades and you're comparing what you're seeing to what's right next to it. Pixel by pixel, pixel by pixel. If we don't even have to use the example of pressing on the arm, we're sitting in chairs right now, and until I said, you know, what's going on at the level of sensation on the backs of your thighs, you were unaware of it, because if you experience a pressure or a smell in a room, you ever walk in, the smell is either good or not good, pretty soon the smell disappears.
Yep.
The neurons are still firing like sledgehammers on a bell, but we become blind and deaf to it because the nervous system likes to habituate the value of that signal when it's there often. And it's only the stuff that comes through signal to noise that kind of jolts us into attention and awareness. And I want to return to attention and awareness, which are prominent themes in the book. And I think it, in an important way, not just, attention and awareness is important, but you also give insight into how to pay better attention, how to pay awareness, with the understanding that people are going to go about it differently. But I do want to ask you about wrestling. Because when I was growing up, I lived south of the Cow Palace, and there was some wrestling going on there. I think back then it was WWF. And there was a short stint in my childhood where I paid attention to, in particular, was it Coco Beware, the guy that had a macaw? I was obsessed with tropical birds. And he would come in and he'd put his tropical bird on thing. And then who's George the Animal Steel, the guy that would eat the ring.
Yeah.
Okay, so, and...
I believe he was a professor. Seriously.
Was he really?
In real life,
amazing.
He was a professor, but he played George the Animal Steel as a wrestler.
And I loved the movie The Wrestler. Wrestler.
Darren Aronofsky movie.
It was
With Mickey Rourke.
Yeah, one of the reasons I liked it is I once visited Asbury Park. Isn't that where that was filmed? There's a vacant. He goes to visit his daughter. There's a vacant amusement park or abandoned amusement park scene there that was really eerie. Still kind of haunts me a little bit. There's something about the East Coast in kind of fall. All the places that people normally go for just for the summer that we don't have out here in the West Coast. People in the East Coast are just tougher than we are. It still haunts me. Great movie. But I remember watching wrestling, and it was at that age, I think I was probably about 12, 13, maybe 11, 12, 13, where, you're kind of entering puberty. So, and puberty is a fundamental landmark of development. It's the most rapid period of aging. It's also when we start to change our rule set. Like, certain people and certain kinds of interactions take on profoundly different meaning, right? It's not just a reproductive competence time and when kids change, their bodies change. The rule book changes fundamentally.
Our understanding of the world changes in that way.
Oh yeah, I mean, the moment that a child understands really what sex is and kind of how they got there, and that a lot of the stuff that we see in the world is kind of passively or not so passively being sent through that filter, it's like it's something. It changes the rule book of perception. I view this age from about 11 to 13, at least for me, was a unique transition point where the gap between what I perceived as reality and fiction was kind of blurry. This is captured pretty well in that movie Stand By Me, where they're hanging around the campfire at night and the kid says, "Who do you think would win in a fight between Superman and Mighty Mouse?" And the other kid says, like, "You idiot, Mighty Mouse is a cartoon. Of course Superman would win. And like, to me, that's being 11 and a half or 12 years old, where
Yes.
your understanding of reality as you know it is changing, but it's not completely crystallized into an adult form reality.
Yes. That sounds like a really healthy place to be to me, like that. Not letting it crystallize. I think that's there's where the downfall happens.
So I have questions specifically about wrestling, but it's really about process.
Yeah.
I want to know whether or not you watch wrestling because it allows you to access the energy state in your body and mind, and that kind of mode of thinking in which reality as one conceives it is somewhat blurry, or is it for a number of other reasons, which is fine? Is that the energy you're trying to export and bring to the creative process elsewhere, to life? Is it that anything is possible, or that we're dealing with archetypes? Because it doesn't matter if it's Coco Beware or Randy Macho Man Savage or George the Animal Steel and the lovely Elizabeth. I guess I did watch a little bit of wrestling. They are archetypes, much like the Greek myths or the Bible, or
Yes.
no disrespect to the Bible or to Greek myths or to wrestling for that matter. Archetypes are a powerful filter for humans, but we know that they're a very limited filter too, because people aren't built like square wave functions. We have curves and contours and complexity. So what is the deal with your relationship to wrestling?
I think it maintains that kind of playfulness. Anything is possible. We expect the unexpected all the time in wrestling, and it's a way to have kind of a feeling of the energy of a sport with no competition. It's everyone is working together to put on the best show they can. So it's more like a ballet than it is like a sporting event. And there's great skill involved. It's one of the few things that I can watch and really feel relaxed. It relaxes me. I don't feel like I have to think about it. I can just relax and enjoy it.
This brings up a topic that is very near and dear to my heart, which is this notion of dopamine schedules. I never want to reduce everything to dopamine, but dopamine is the universal currency of delight, pleasure, motivation seeking. There are other chemicals involved too, but there's a beautiful experiment and a couple of examples that I'll use as a foundation to more questions about wrestling and why it's powerful and why other people may want to use wrestling or some other endeavor as a way to access creative energy and source. Earlier we talked about, you can train an animal to press a lever 3 times and then get reward, and it will learn 3 is the magic number for reward, and then it can switch. It takes a little bit of training and then they can switch. But they can't do prime numbers. They can't do high abstraction schedules. Humans either. We're not very good at figuring out the rule set for optimal foraging. We do it well enough to persist as a species, at least for now, but it's very likely that we are not tapping into that system as well as we could. And how would we know if we don't know? It's one of those, you don't know what you don't know. There's a beautiful experiment that explored when dopamine is released in the context of watching sport or watching comedy, believe it or not. And with the comedy stuff, it was every time there was a surprise. It was kind of that jarring, like, haha, and they'd measure people's dopamine output. They were also brain imaging. In the game of basketball, it's a beautiful opportunity experimentally, because every time one team gets the ball or shooting free throws or something, they're going down court, and it's either going to end up in the basket or it's not. Might end up on the free throw line, but it's never not. So what they found is that the schedule of anticipation was every time there was a switch of which team got it. So you're waiting, and then it's, you're waiting, yes, waiting, 3-pointer, oh, awesome. And if something happened where it looked like they were going to make the 3-pointer, but then somebody basically swatted the ball away and then went for a half-court shot, like you don't expect that very often, bigger dopamine release. Okay, so that's kind of how the dopamine thing works. When you describe wrestling, I wonder, because you don't know the script, it's not one team gets it, then the other team gets it. You don't know who's going to win. Anything could happen is what you said.
Yes.
The availability of that dopamine surge or drip, which is a powerful thing, is completely out of your reach in terms of anticipation. You don't know when it's going to come, but it must arrive often enough that you return to it 11 hours a week of watching. In many ways, the way I'm starting to conceptualize the creative process is a little bit the same. You don't know where those nuggets of gold and those loose threads are, but you have enough experience, and in this case I am referring to you specifically, to know that they are in there. The people walking in this room have a certain level of ability and talent to create that. The map will form itself as we are going through the voyage, and those nuggets of, here I'm calling them dopamine, but they are out there, and that knowledge is enough to get you to come back again and again, to trust the process. So I actually think the way you describe wrestling as, it's the energy of the sport. It's not the whether or not it's this move or that move or who wins or who loses. It's the energy, and I'm guessing it's the energy that it creates in you as an observer.
Yes, it's the energy it creates in me, and the reality that it's honest in what it is, in a world where seemingly nothing is honest at what it is. And again, not because people are lying all the time. We have a little data, we make up a story to explain it, and then we say that's what happened. And we have trusted sources who do exactly what I just described, and who pass this down as gospel of what we teach, and maybe it's true and maybe it's not. With wrestling, we know maybe it's true, maybe it's not. We lean towards it not being true. But what's really interesting about wrestling, and maybe one of the most fun things about it, is that sometimes real life works its way into the story. Like two wrestlers get married. Now,
in real life.
Well, we don't know. It's like that. You never know. It's like in the storyline, they're getting married or getting divorced, or best friends turn on each other. And it could be part of the story, and it could really be happening, because they do, right? Someone breaks their leg, so they're out because their leg is broken. Did they break their leg? We don't know. They're out. Do you know what I'm saying? We're told they broke their leg, so there's always this I wonder what's true. I wonder where the line is. We know that it's scripted or predetermined. That's how they say it. It's predetermined, but we don't know where reality is and isn't. And in some ways, that's our real experience of the world. Is this? We don't really know where reality is and isn't. We have an idea, maybe. I think in some ways wrestling's more honest or legitimate, because we start with the idea that it's fixed. When we go to a boxing match, we don't go to a boxing match thinking it's fixed, yet it might be. And historically, it's happened. Or there was just something in baseball where, was it baseball?
I don't follow baseball, I should know.
There was just a big sports, one of the teams that
plays, basically.
Yes.
Is it the call signals of the of the catcher?
Yes.
Yeah, they were. You're not supposed to deprogram or deconstruct the call signals of the other team, and I guess maybe a team got caught doing that.
Yes, and the team that won whatever the World Series was. So it's like with wrestling, that wouldn't be a scandal. Do you know what I'm saying? It's like,
because almost anything goes.
Anything goes, and that's what the world is really like. So in some ways it's comforting, and there's still this mystery of wow, I wonder if that's true or not, because we never really know. Someone gets hurt. Did they really break their back, or are they just going on vacation? We don't know. We'll never know. Fascinating.
It is fascinating, and I feel like there are certain people who show up in a way that is surprising in not just one direction, but in all directions. Like, it's one thing for a celebrity to come out and make a statement. That can be interesting or not interesting, depending on the celebrity and the statement and the delivery. But, and I'm probably going to get this wrong because I'm terrible at pop culture things, most of them anyway. But as I recall, Lady Gaga showed up to some event wearing outfit made of meat. And I can't tell you for the life of me whether or not that was a statement against meat or for meat. Maybe it was a statement for the carnivore diet. Maybe it was a statement for veganism. I don't know.
Yeah,
Either way,
or maybe neither.
or maybe neither. But it was definitely a statement in that it broke with the norm.
Mm-hmm.
And it said to me, okay, she creates different rules for herself, or sort of breaks boundaries that other people had. I never heard of anyone doing that before. Which doesn't mean they hadn't, but I never heard of anyone doing it before. But we do tend to associate outside the current playbook with quote unquote creativity, unless it crosses a line, in which case it becomes something else. It becomes almost theater for sake of theater. But what you're telling me is that within the realm of wrestling, theater is the goal at some level. And everybody knows it who goes into those arenas, who watches it.
Yes.
Everybody.
Yes.
And everyone agrees to kind of suspend outside reality and say, this is reality.
Yes. And they boo for the bad guys and cheer for the good guys, knowing that backstage they're probably friends.
Except for the kids that are 11 who think it's really real.
I don't know. I don't even know if they know. I'm not sure.
The only other person I know who has vocalized their love of professional wrestling to the extent that you have is Lars Fredrickson, the rhythm guitar player for Rancid, who loves wrestling. But his statement, and forgive me, Lars, if I'm getting this wrong, is that because he grew up in an area of the South, there were no teams. Like now there's the San Jose Earthquakes, but there was no football team in San Jose. He's from Campbell, but there were no like good teams, no sports teams, but they had wrestling, and he had it where? On the television set. And so if you didn't have I didn't grow up with any organized sport thing. The 49ers were up the road, but for me it was skateboarding, and I love it for the same reason. You actually never really know what's going to happen. There is no rule book. The rule book is made up.
Mm-hmm.
But they are very, it's a unique sport in that surfing's a bit like this too, in that they are absolutely maniacal about making things look a certain way. It's not about just doing it, it's about doing it and making it look good.
Yeah.
Smooth, catching it with the front foot, and the trends change.
Style. It's a style.
Style is this like nebulous thing of like, in fashion or in sport. Right.
Yeah.
Whereas with a football, there's some amazing catches. There's even like the catch, which I happen to know is a 49 the catch during the Super Bowl. But in general, it's like the goal is get in the end zone, win the game. And I'm sure football players are like cringing as I say this, but it doesn't matter if you run ugly, if you run fastest. In skateboarding, that would never fly. In fact, you'd basically be ridiculed out of the sport.
Mm-hmm.
In wrestling, is it the same? Is there style to wrestling?
It's all performance. It's all the charisma of the people involved. There's the physical ability, the ability to talk and tell a story, and the how charismatic the performers are. Whether you want to watch them, whether you want to see them win, whether you want to see them lose, and whether you're interested in cheering or booing for them.
I was gonna say it reminds me of opera, but opera get released over and over again. You know the story and how it ends when you walk in if you've listened to it before.
Mm-hmm.
So wrestling does seem to be unique in that way. It's real-time iteration, at least from the perspective of you.
And it's real-time iteration based on, because people get hurt all the time, they're doing really crazy physical stuff. So if someone gets hurt, the story has to change because in real life they can't show up next week and do what was planned in the script. So it's very alive, and there's a lot of something interesting and unexpected is always happening.
Well, in a much more calm form, I'll share with you something. I just like your perspective on it. For years, I used a tool in order to try and access ideas. Since I was a little kid, actually, because I have a little bit of OCD, a little bit of a Tourette. When I get tired, I'll do that. I'm like very strategy implementation oriented. I had to, when I was a little kid, I needed all my stuffed animals arranged in a certain way. Legos had to be, a little neurotic, or a lot. And then science is very much about, you have to do things with a lot of precision. And I discovered that the ultimate reset for me when I was in graduate school or a postdoc, if I couldn't make it to a really good like agnostic front show or like chaos, like the chaos of a punk rock show for me was kind of this reset. It was like, to like release all this thing, and I got energy from it. First time I saw Transplants play, you know, it's like, wow, because you don't know what's gonna happen. And it was scary, and I loved it. The other thing that I used over time to kind of reset this ability to think in a structured way without it feeling like it was overcoming me, maybe even access the same thing in some ways that you're accessing with wrestling, was I like to stare at aquaria. Like I like to go to aquariums, or I'd build aquariums, and I would just sit there because you never know which way the fish are going to go. You think it's going that way, but then all of a sudden they'll turn and go the other way. It's completely unpredictable. And I love aquaria because of the tranquility, and had them in my lab for a long time. I just adore aquariums because of the non-linearity of it. It's not A, B, C, it's A, Z, Z, Q, you know. And I think this is what some people try and access through psychedelics, but that didn't seem to me like a very good way to do it on a regular basis. Whereas with Aquaria, the tanks are there. So in your book, you talk about something that I also share a love for, which is how you know, the ocean and aspects of nature like clouds and ocean, they have a predictability to them. We know where they are and where to find them. Fortunately, the sun rises and sets every day, at least for now. And we can count on them with 100% reliability. And yet they are, from the perspective of like what physicists would say, they're very chaotic. You can't look at a wave and know exactly how the foam is going to roll out. You know it's going to roll in and roll out. We have the tides. But when I hear about wrestling, I think about my love of Aquaria. I think about my love of punk rock music, for instance. Or I think about the ocean. I think of it in that way, that we actually have a need to source from things that have both a combination of structure and no structure.
I think it's interesting that there are some places that don't change and some places that change a lot. And I can remember thinking about this. I was walking, there's a beach that I walk on in Hawaii that I walk on every morning when I'm there. And if you walk on the same beach every day, you kind of get a sense of what it's like. And I remember I was in Hawaii, walked on the beach every day for a year, however long it was. And then I left for 6 months, and I came back. And the next time I walked on the beach, it was an entirely different beach, entirely different. And I remember thinking in that moment, like, this is an unusual place, because I pictured the house that I didn't even grow up in. The house I lived in maybe for the first 7 years of my life. And I think about what the backyard looked like, and I think about a particular old tree that was there. And I don't know this for sure, but my sense is if I were to go back to where I grew up and go to that place and look in that yard, it would probably look pretty similar. Yet, here was this beach that I was walking on in Hawaii that in the course of 6 months completely changed its face. And just how interesting both of those things are, and that depending on the project we're working on, to be able to go to a place that we know has the potential to change a lot, and what that would do to our connection with the earth when we're experiencing that, versus going to a place that has very little change, and you can kind of count on it being the way it's always been. That both of those are interesting things to be able to draw upon, depending on what we want to open in our psyche.
I have an almost unhealthy fascination with New York in the mid '80s and '90s, and
You didn't live there though.
no, but since I was a kid, I went there when I was a little kid, and I was fascinated by it. There's also a very interesting migration of East Coast to West Coast creatives, including yourself, that played an important part of my life, just seeing things and hearing things that were meaningful to me. But I like, for instance, I love the movie. I haven't seen the documentary, but the one about Jean-Michel Basquiat, because of the characters that were in it and the huge number of people in that, like Parker Posey, Dennis Hopper, and Christopher Walken, and on and on. Those images of New York at that time are so exciting, and what was happening. I wish I could transplant myself to that. If I had a time machine, that's where I'd land first. I hear a lot of people say, you know, New York isn't what it used to be. San Francisco isn't what it used to be. Whatever. LA isn't what. there does seem to be something that feels a little bit disruptive to people about cities changing. But the idea that natural landscapes change is actually, we even accept, like, hey, fires sweep through places, and assuming they weren't started by humans, we accept that change and the reordering of landscapes is normal and healthy. And I always tell myself, yeah, the kids growing up in New York or San Francisco or Chicago now, they only know it that way. So to them, it's as cool or as uncool as it's ever going to be.
Yeah.
Right? They either want to get out or they're loving every piece of it. And this happened for all the people that came before us. So my question is a very basic one. Do you miss the New York that you came up in? Are you somebody who is attached to the past?
I'm not attached at all. I'm not attached to anything in the past. I don't look back at all.
You don't think about, like, oh, in my dorm room at NYU, Beastie Boys, this, like, I miss. No, your optics are forward, present and forward.
Only present and forward.
Is there a process to that, or it just happens to be where you default to?
I don't know. I'm not sure, but that's how I do it.
Nostalgia's not, in Rick Rubin's brain.
No.
Oh, lucky you, man.
No.
I say that with genuine, like, admiration. So you can hear a song that maybe you had a role in producing or not, something from the past, and you're accessing a state, presumably, but you're not pining for or wishing how it was.
Never.
I'm no psychologist, but I'm going to venture to say that I think that's a very unique quality. I think a lot of people wish for or wish that things did not happen the way they did, that there's a lot of living in the past. There's a lot of this notion of, like, people future trip.
Yeah.
I don't actually think that's the default state of the brain. I think a lot of people live in emotional anchors to the past, good and bad.
Yeah. I have none.
And watching wrestling is one way that you cleanse the palate.
Yeah.
Like when you go to a meal and they pass around this, that don't really do this anymore, but pass around a little bit of sorbet to cleanse the palate. Turns out there's a biological reason for that. There's a kind of neutralization of the taste receptors between savory and sweet, etc. So if wrestling is your palate neutralizer.
I know that if I watch wrestling before I go to sleep, it's going to be a good night's sleep.
Do you dream about wrestling?
No, never.
Speaking,
but it's just relaxing. It's just relaxing.
Do you anticipate when you watch it? Like, here comes the dopamine hit.
Sometimes when it happens,
He's going
like,
up for the
exciting.
three-pointer.
Yeah, sometimes it's exciting.
But do you enjoy?
But even then, it's like the stakes are low. It's like I don't really care what happens, which feels good. You know that. I'm just being entertained.
Do they actually get hurt? Sometimes you said they do.
A lot. Often. They're basically stuntmen. So imagine a stuntman getting hurt doing a crazy stunt.
Well,
happens all the time.
Well, in the movie The Wrestler, I remember he got staples stapled into him, and I thought, that's pretty intense. I once went and saw, I guess they called it Mexican wrestling. I don't know if they call it that anymore, where the guys dipped their hands. Yeah, they dipped their hands in glass. This was in Sacramento, and I went and saw it, and I honestly didn't have a stomach for it. I really didn't. Yeah. I couldn't believe it was legal. It might not have been legal.
Yeah.
But I thought...
There's crazy stuff in wrestling sometimes.
Wow. So, before sleep, is that typically when you watch wrestling?
Yes.
Do you think it's useful for people to have some activity that allows them to kind of clear their mind and create peace before heading off to sleep?
I think so, and I think yoga nidras would be a good. It's like yoga nidra, pro wrestling, any of the,
yeah,
any of those type things.
Yeah, not watching the Dahmer thing. I won't watch that.
I don't watch any horror, anything, or I don't like violent things.
I know it exists. I know horrible things happen in the world, but I certainly don't want to do that before sleep. I think these liminal states before and emerging from sleep are very powerful. When you wake up in the morning, are your thoughts immediately structured, or do you enjoy the kind of clearing of the clouds?
It's a slow process for me to wake up, and I like that. I like not engaging too much too soon. I also I usually fall asleep listening to a lecture or something speaking, because if I don't, I can get caught in my own thoughts, and listening to something is enough of a focus point that it stops me from talking to myself.
I do the same. My grandfather listened to the radio, to sports on the radio, and he would fall asleep. Oftentimes, he was a smoker with a cigarette in his mouth. His wife's responsibility was to stay up later than he did to make sure he didn't burn everything down. Um, and then when you wake up, you said it's a slow process. Is it an hour or two before you feel like you're?
I would say probably an hour. I usually wake up and try to get in the sun as soon as I possibly can, and hope to spend about an hour, and then I'll usually go for a walk on the beach for another hour or 90 minutes, depending.
Are you with family members and other people at that
No,
time?
I'm usually focused by myself.
Phone?
I'll be listening to something. I don't look at the phone, but I listen. I listen to, again, a lecture or podcast or audiobook. I like audiobooks a lot.
Yeah, I do too. If an idea comes to mind, do you write it down?
I may. It depends. I like to. I usually would do a note in my phone. I don't usually carry pen and paper with me when I'm walking.
Yeah, I do the same. I do a long Sunday hike or jog, and I will audio script into my phone. People sometimes give me funny looks because I'm talking to myself, and
That's a nice way to do it, though. I'd like to learn more of the audio methods of doing it instead of the typing methods. Right now I type, and I don't think it's the best way.
The voice memos function in the iPhone and other phones is really good, and they're now companies like Rev.com that will turn those into Word doc scripts
Right.
that are fairly well corrected,
Right.
fairly inexpensive. No, they're not a sponsor of the podcast. I just happen to use it. It's great. I actually learned that trick from Richard Axel, the Nicorette chewing wild man Nobel Prize winner. He writes manuscripts and by walking around his office pacing and talking into his phone.
I always think of the Woody Allen movie where the Alan Alda character is, talking about, he's speaking comedy ideas into the phone. It's really pretentious.
I liked that movie about Harvey Milk.
Yeah.
That Sean Penn played Harvey Milk, because that all took place before I was alive, mostly in the Bay Area. But there's these beautiful scenes of him, as I recall, sitting there at his kitchen table talking into a tape recorder at night, talking about how he predicted that he would be possibly assassinated,
Wow.
etc. And this goes back to the Strummer thing about writing things down. I think that a lot of people, including myself, feel a little bit of like egotistical guilt around like, who am I to think that my ideas could be worthwhile or something. But I think over time I've come to realize that the ideas about experiments or health questions I have about health, they don't always, but oftentimes can lead to real seeds that grow into
But
big
it's
trees.
something that's interesting to you. It doesn't matter what anyone else thinks. Most of my notes are not for anyone else's
Right.
for anyone else's use. Like I hear about something that's interesting to me, and I think about, okay, I want to learn more about this, whatever it is. And then sometimes those things work their way into things I'm doing because the universe seems to work in that way. But I rarely am learning something with the idea of using it. I learn things with the idea of, this is what I want to know. This is what's interesting to me. And then often those things that are interesting to me can find their way into other projects just because they do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's almost like coal or kindling, but the moment that you think of it that way, it sort of it sounds so extractive, right? But if you take this walk and you're writing down the occasional idea, perhaps, and then what is the next sort of the way that here are less than do this, then this, then that. I'm interested in like, where does your mind shift to? Does it become more structured as the day goes on? Does your thinking become more structured around projects and plans?
I try to deal with things that need dealing with after that, and in preparation for going to work. And then when I go to work, it's more like this free thing where I'm, again, hoping something good comes, welcoming something good, paying attention, and maybe trying to will it to happen, but never, but knowing I don't have the ability to make it happen. I can just be present for it and be ready if it does arrive.
some of the more surprising and I found really interesting and useful features of the book were about sort of dancing with structure and lack of structure. So when I think of structure, I think of like deadlines. So when you are in the process of creating something, um, obviously deadlines are relevant, time of day, right? There's only so many hours in the day where one can stay in the groove or in this like readiness to receive. Um, have you ever found yourself in that mode where you're kind of grinding, like here we are, like okay, I'm not coming home for dinner tonight. It's the next, we're gonna push. We're like
Yeah.
put on the coffee pot kind of thing.
A lot in the over the course of my life, a lot, not as much now. Um, and one of the things that I discovered through working on the book was the phases of work. We're not required to treat the different phases of work in the same way. Whereas before, I did. Before, everything was in this state of play. Everything had a wide open time schedule. It happens when it happens. And if it takes 2 years or 3 years, it doesn't matter. It's not about that. It's only about this thing has to be great. And what I came to realize in working on the book is that there are different phases. And the first phase is this seed collecting phase, which is kind of an ongoing part of life in general. I do that always, whether I'm working on something or not. I'm always in the seed collecting phase, and there's no deadline or just anything that interests me that I think I want to learn more about or has potential to be something, anything, something. I hear something, think, I'd like to read more about that, or I wonder if there's a movie about that. Is there a movie about that? If not, maybe there's a movie to be made. Again, this is something I want in my life. Let's see if it exists. If it doesn't exist, then maybe that's something interesting to pursue. But I know that the desire is there because I have it. So in the seed phase, there's no deadlines. It's just a wide open heart. And then the next phase is called the experimentation phase, where we start experimenting to see what the seeds want to do. You're involved, but you're more of you're not really dictating the action. You're setting the stage for something to happen, but it's not about you yet. So it'd be like the equivalent of you'd plant the seed, you would water it, you would make sure it was in the sun, and you'd wait. So you're involved, but you can't make it grow, And then when it sprouts and it grows, or if it turns into a plant, then you can look at the plant. Like, okay, how does this plant? What's the potential of this plant? And then that the third phase is the crafting phase, where it's like, okay, I have this plant. Maybe I'm going to trim it, or maybe I'm going to combine it with these other plants to make something else with it. Now it's like material that you have, and then finally is the completion or finishing phase, which is the final edit, getting to the version of it, the version of it that's the one that you can share with the world if that's something you're going to do. And I've come to realize that by the time you're going into the completion phase, you can have a deadline, and it won't hurt the project. In fact, it might help the project. And I didn't know that before. So I've worked on projects that have gone longer than they necessarily needed to, and maybe not in the best interest of the project, because I didn't know that. I didn't understand that the timing of that, because I am so aware of the necessity in the experimental phase to not have a deadline, that I assumed that held through the whole project. And they're not. It's not a clear phase one finishes and then you start phase two finishes and then you start phase three. You move back and forth between them. I'm collecting seeds all the time. I'm always in phase one. And then probably to some degree, there's always some version of experimentation going on. Maybe not now, but if something's on a list of things I want to look at, hopefully I'll get to the list and give them some experimentation and see what they can turn into. And then if they do turn into something, then they get to the crafting phase where it's more, okay, now I have this thing. What do I know about this kind of thing? What can I match this with? What can I use this for? How can I be involved as a craftsman? And by the end of the crafting phase, or deep into the crafting phase, you can start seeing the end. You can start seeing an end, and then you can even dictate an end. But I recommend, if you do, just dictate it for you, not for anyone else, because if something comes up where you learn, if you set a deadline, public deadline, and then a new discovery happens along the way and you realize, oh, this could actually be much better than I thought, but I need more time, it's harder to do that if you set the deadline. So I would say have an internal deadline to finish it. That said, if an unusual situation comes up and it's better for everything not to meet that deadline, it's one of those rules that you set the rule to break it if it's what's best for the project. But that was a new thing for me, and it helped me a lot.
When did you realize that?
In collecting the material for the book and thinking about it, when I realized that it was phases, I didn't know any of this. When I started writing the book, I didn't know hardly any of the things in the book. They're more, most of it would be reverse engineering something that I had a successful experience using these methods without knowing they were methods. Just following my instincts got me to something good. And then I would look back at, why did I want to do that? And is there a principle at play that could be of use outside of this case? And how do I explain that? And that's what the book is these reverse engineered principles that have led to good decision making and trying to make things.
The chapter on self-doubt was really interesting to me.
Tell me what it says, because I can't remember.
Well, I'll read the first sentence of it, which is that self-doubt lives in all of us. And while we may wish it was gone, it is there to serve us. And it goes on to describe how to dance with self-doubt in about so many words. I think, there's a saying that is actually from the landscape of psychology, which is generally discussed in a kind of pathological context, which is if nothing matters, anything goes. This is usually the phrase used to describe people who feel as if like there's no use in living, so just go crazy, often to self-destruct. But there's a light version of this, I realize, where in some sense the creative process seems to have something to do with, if you're not paying attention to what outcomes are, like who likes it, who doesn't like it, and you're just doing it for you make the rule play, I want to delight myself, well then anything goes, and you have an infinite rule set there to extract from, at least initially. So as one gets better at their craft, you can imagine self-doubt goes down. I think that's the perception of a lot of people, right? You get better at what you're doing. You can land more free throws as a basketball player. You can hit more home runs as a baseball player. You can produce more platinum albums as an artist. Self-confidence goes up, self-doubt goes down. But I think you and I both know a number of people who are successful enough to know that oftentimes there's a mirror image to that, where people feel pressure because they did it once, now they got to do it again.
Yes, or that you think you're so good at it that it comes easily and you don't have to apply yourself.
Arrogance.
Yeah. So self-doubt it's like it's a check on yourself. It can either be really helpful or it can undermine you. So it's something we all have, and if we let it undermine us, then we don't make anything. That's not good. But when used as a balancing tool in our lives, it serves a great function, where we really do. It's okay to have all the confidence in the world and still second guess, is this the best it can be? You can doubt. I think the phrase is in the book. You can doubt your way to a great work, to a masterpiece. Sometimes that questioning allows you to push further than just accepting I made it so it's good.
Yeah, I've encountered more people that seem to be driven by self-doubt and the need to constantly perform and perform again than I have real arrogance. Just that's been my experience, fortunately. I've met some arrogant people in my life, but and of course we never, as a psychiatrist who I admire a lot, and bioengineer who was a guest on this podcast, Carl Deiseroth, said, we never really know how other people feel. I mean, most of the time we don't even know how we feel. Again, language is a very deprived format for explaining feelings. So we think somebody feels one way, but we can observe, and it could be another, but we observe their behavior. So in the sense of returning to the work, just always returning to process. It sounds like your routine is fairly scripted, at least now. But the things that you are getting in touch with, wrestling, sleep and dreaming, the ocean, there's a predictability of them because you can access them in a predictable way, but they seem to have a lot of unpredictability.
I get ready for work.
The ocean is completely unpredictable.
I do the main thing.
I also listen to a lot of music.
The main
that
three that I like doing.
So listen to
The fourth one tends to be
a lot
old
of
muscle
classical
training,
music, and
next time.
less so, but some jazz, and a lot of old music that I never heard before. And I like being surprised by music. And sometimes it really catches me off guard. Like I Shazam a lot, when I hear something I like.
Have you ever encountered music that really works well live, but just does not work in a recording? Or that is that much better live, but the recording is sort of meh? You don't have to name names.
Yeah, I don't think so. I feel like maybe there's some artists who are great live who've never captured it well on record. Example would probably be the Grateful Dead's a good example of a band where I feel like their live recordings, they're really interesting and really different from each other. And that's kind of part of what makes the Grateful Dead interesting, is their unpredictability.
I confess, I had a sister who listened to Grateful Dead, and I got taken to a few shows when I was younger, and they would do that, what is it called, space? It was like these drum solos that would go on for hours and hours. This is like
2 hours and 20 minutes. Okay, 2 hours and 20 minutes. Anyway, that's it for today. Back on Friday morning, hopefully. And yeah, just keep soldiering on. If you ever need advice or anything, please don't hesitate to message. I love giving advice. Maybe too much, I think, sometimes. Might be overwhelming, but that's just the type of person I am, I guess, now. I do. With my work and what I have responsibility to the people. So hopefully get you to wherever you want to get to. Anyway, till next time.